In response to complexity and uncertainty and rapid systemic change, the natural reaction of most organizations is to create cultures of distraction and to do the things out of every good intention. We invest in technology, we spend on leadership and personal development, right? We do all sorts of things. We go on a retreat, and yet the numbers continue to show people are more inundated, more interrupted than ever before. And for the last decade, I've studied these issues and worked with organizations on how do you think about it from a team perspective? Like, how do we actually get this done trainings? And all of that was before COVID. And then COVID hits, and we have this incredible opportunity for a reset with some serious new challenges, right? So let me just give you some numbers on what we're seeing as a function of COVID. It turns out we're just making it worse. How do we change this equation? I want to spend the rest of our time really just unpacking a different way of thinking about it, a different way of approaching how we set up our teams. And if you lead a team, this is particularly important. And if you're on a team, every person plays such a critical role that we can do things to support one another in order to be able to get focused. And here's the real reason why we struggle with clarity, because lots of people have opinions on what you should pay attention to. There's a lot of people and a lot of organizations that are very interested in what you pay attention to. Yelp says, go here. YouTube says, watch this. Google says, read about this. Twitter says, be angry at this, right? Netflix says, you better finish this. And if you haven't seen Tiger King, it's really worth it. I don't know. Or Queen's Gambit. Like, there's so many sources that are all saying, we'll give you something for free as long as you'll give us your attention. And they know that if you give your attention, then your pocketbook will follow. Because they know that your attention is the brain's mechanism for selecting what matters most at a given place in a given time. Distraction at its core is confusion about what matters. It's confusion at a moment, what really matters. And so why is technology always implicated? Because technology in this case, it distorts our relationship with the places and the spaces we occupy. This is very important, because technology does incredible good. The United Nations said in 2010 that the smartphone was one of the greatest inventions in history for the alleviation of poverty. Technology is incredible what it can do for us. But it sells us an idea that where you are doesn't matter. When we try to multitask, we get emotionally disconnected. And finally, maybe the most important one is we lose the ability to differentiate importance. Everything feels important. And we manage simultaneously all this stuff. We're constantly reminded of what we can't get to. And we fill and we fill and we fill, and then we lose control and we end up frustrated, burnt out, overwhelmed. And so the question is, how do you shift so that you divide your time, but not your attention? Here's my week. Meeting. That's my week. And I knew someone else that they literally broke a toe because they have meeting. It's like at some point you got to go to the bathroom. You're going to be late to one, but like they ran and broke a toe. Like we're scheduling it, and it makes total sense because we want to connect. We want to see each other. Here's the problem. 40 minutes on Zoom where you're actively having to stare at the monitor, you lose the ability to concentrate. 2 hours a day, cortisol levels start spiking. So we fill our schedules, and then digital, we create cultures where responsiveness is evidence of work. We can't see you, so now you have to be immediately available to show that you're really working instead of like doing all these distractions, like making sure your kids aren't dying, right? Like that's what we're doing. And here's the question I have for you. Is your team, in the way that you're communicating and engaging one another, are you alleviating or adding burdens to one another? Are you creating capacity, or are you removing it from each other? Now we have what's called fragmented identity. We enter in, and the relationship becomes commodity. Pay me to do as little as possible. The company wants to pay as little to get as much out of, and it's replaceable parts. And then we wonder why we have trouble with people leaving. The average half-life for skills in today's workplace is 5 years. You can't hire anyone, you don't have the skills you need for 5 years from now. And as fast as we're changing, and everyone says we're not made for this, the human brain is perfectly designed for change. And it's the slowest it's ever going to be. Change is only accelerating. So we have to meet that by cultivating intentional curiosity. Okay, so I'm bringing you over to my office closet, and I just want to warn you, it's not pretty. This is this is where all the stuff goes that I don't want to pay attention to. I don't even know why this. I have a basketball. I don't even know where a goal is. I have no idea why this is here. But in a lot of ways, this is actually exactly how attention works. Like, why have I not fixed this? Why does this space look like such a disaster? And the reason is simple, because if I can close the door, it doesn't exist to me, right? And that's actually how attention works. Imagine that focus goes out of focus. I think that's the right way to say that. It gets a little bit less clear as to where you're supposed to give your attention. And frankly, I'm guessing that it's not all that enjoyable to watch me out of focus right now. It turns out that when things are out of focus, we don't like to pay attention to them. It gets really complicated. So what we desperately need is clarity on what deserves attention. And in fact, that tells us something about what distraction really is. Because often we think of distraction as being on our phones. I get this all the time, right? In fact, I was walking through an airport and somebody walked up to me and they're like, "Hey, aren't you the distraction guy?" And I was on my phone texting my wife on my way into the gate. This is back in the good old days, right? And I look up and I'm like, he's like, "Stop being distracted." I was like, "You caught me. I was distracted by you. You distracted me." My phone wasn't my distraction. It was what I needed to focus on. It's not technology that's the distraction. Distraction is confusion about what deserves attention. It's confusion about what matters. What I want to do is I just want to say each of these things that do matter most, with one of them being my family, has to have an associated time and place where they get my full attention. Nothing benefits from my partial attention. And so I don't feel guilty not giving my kids attention throughout the day, but that means that from 5 to 7 p.m., they get my full attention. And so it's really saying, how do we make some selections and we assign time that does that? And here's the even more critical piece. We can't identify what matters most. We can't make good selections if we don't step out of the noise for at least a little bit to be able to actually assess this. That's the real reason people feel distracted all the time, is because there's no space or rhythm where they're not inundated by noise that's screaming, "This is what matters," for us to be able to identify it ourselves.